My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. On this program, I've interviewed several people who've shared their experiences of ET or alien encounters. Some have described these experiences, at least initially, as abductions. What's been missing from the recounting, at least of those who have come forward to share, is describing the experience with the eye of an engineer and from a scientific perspective until now. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Stewart W. Bench, has come forward to share his story using his technical experience to describe the specifications of the alien craft, their technology, their communications, and their mission. Stewart W. Bench is a retired electrical engineer who experienced several encounters and abductions. His website is stewartwbench.com, and he joins me this week to share his story and just published book, A Cosmic Encounter, a true story of an alien abduction. To maintain his privacy, Stewart requested that his voice be masked. So please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Stewart W. Bench. Welcome, Stewart.
Victor, I want you to know that I'm honored to be participating in this interview with you, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
And we are grateful to have you with us today. Stewart, please tell us about your early life and how it manifested on your path.
I was born in 1952 and grew up in a rural community during the early days of our country's first ventures into satellites and manned excursions into space. As elementary school-age kids, my friend Bob and I were fascinated by rocket ships and space travel. During summer vacation, we'd visit the local appliance store to hopefully salvage a cardboard box refrigerators were shipped in at the time before it ended up in the burn barrel. We'd load the box onto my red Flyer wagon and drag it home to become an imaginary rocket ship. After numerous stops along the way to reload the box that invariably slid off the wagon, it eventually ended up in my backyard. A window was cut in the box and controls and instruments were drawn on the side using a crayon. Our rocket ship was then ready to blast off for many sweaty summer hours of outer space exploration. After a few days, rainy weather would do the box in, and by that time it would be crumpled and torn from tumbling over in simulated crash landings with the laughing spacefarers sprawled inside. There'd always be another rocket ship available in the store in the next few days. As a teenager, I was fascinated by magazine articles on the various planetary probes and with TV coverage of the Apollo program's moon landings. As a young adult, I became interested in accounts of UFOs and alien contact and abductions, and that interest continues to this day.
What was your early reaction to the stories of others about UFOs and alien encounters?
I developed a degree of skepticism about some aspects of the accounts I'd read. I tended to accept details that correlated among a number of versions. I elected to dismiss other things that seemed a bit far-fetched to me. I had no doubt that we were being visited by extraterrestrials and that people were being abducted by them. I also had no doubt that I'd never meet an alien or acquire any first-hand knowledge about them. That certainly evaporated, and my point of view changed radically one afternoon in August of 1992.
You are a man of science with a long and accomplished career as an electrical engineer. As much as you've written Cosmic Encounter with that background and sharing detail with the eye of an engineer, were you concerned about ridicule from your peers?
I most certainly was concerned about ridicule and the scorn of friends and coworkers. I learned early on that even my wife and teenage kids had an aversion to discussions of my encounters. My wife Bev and daughter Anne knew of my obsession with books on ETs, and they both thought I was borderline crazy. My son Ted not only believed that his dad was nuts, he detested any mention of the subject. He'd been subjected to intense derision by a few of his classmates. I would surely have lost my job if the folks at work got wind of my alien contacts. To this day, long after the events, I worry a little about the reaction of friends and relatives when the book is released. Some of them will probably think of me as a tin hat wearing eccentric. Maybe they're right.
Stewart, please share with our listeners your first encounter.
We lived just outside of a rural town on a plot of land that was once a farm garden. For a few years, we'd been aware of a growing population of cute little red squirrels taking advantage of the seed in our bird feeder. At first, they were welcome to coexist with us, but we soon discovered that they were living in our outbuildings and chewing holes where we didn't want holes. We acquired a live capture trap, baited it with peanut butter, and began transporting the captives to a nearby open space to be released far removed from human habitation. While returning home from what for good reason was to be the last of these excursions, the headlights of another vehicle I spotted in my truck's rearview mirror turned out to be a UFO. As the saucer-shaped craft overtook my truck, my engine sputtered and shook so violently that I pulled off the road and turned the ignition off. The saucer landed nearby, and two occupants that I recognized from my readings as Greys emerged from the craft. I had foolishly exited the disabled truck, thinking that I could somehow escape whatever fate awaited me. It wasn't to be. Accustomed as I was to reading tales of other folks' alien encounters, I was shaking in my boots over my own involvement. The two Greys approached me, and I was surprised that my initial nervousness began to fade. While there was no verbal communication, I got the strong impression that I was being sized up for some sort of alien mission. This was painfully reinforced when one of the pair jabbed my finger with a sharp instrument and snipped off a lock of my hair. Apparently, having achieved what they came for, the two entered the ship and soon were on their way. When they were gone, I was relieved that my truck started, and I too was on my way, vowing that the remaining squirrels were welcome to the tool shed and the birdseed.
Did the Greys look like beings described by others who have had similar experiences?
Yes, for the most part, what I observed correlates well with what's been written about them. They're said to be childlike in stature, slight of build, with long arms and hands, with a thumb and 3 long fingers. Their most distinguishing features are their oversized head and large, dark, slanted eyes. They have very thin lips and no nose as such, with 2 small depressions where nostrils would be expected. Likewise, they have 2 small depressions where ears should be. I found their appearance to be far less menacing than many of the depictions I'd seen.
Some have speculated that Greys may be a hybrid between biological entities and robot-like machines. What was your sense of their makeup?
I'm convinced that they're biological, and they probably are clones. They can be considered bionic in the sense that they have a surgically added feeding tube combined with a body waste removal port in their abdomen. This accommodation is needed to provide nourishment, medical remediation, and waste removal during their long intervals in space. They're essentially unconscious at the time and in an induced state similar to hibernation.
How did you communicate with the Greys, and what was shared with you?
The Greys communicate among themselves and with humans telepathically. As far as I know, they're incapable of speech. Basic, uncomplicated communication with us is conducted by way of images, concepts, and notions that are familiar to humans. Words and language are not employed. I found that intelligibility is greatly enhanced by eye contact with the aliens. A much more effective means of communication involves the infamous implant. I was the unwilling recipient of one during my second encounter with the ETs. The tiny device was surgically inserted in close proximity to the brain, typically in the tissues accessible through the person's nose. The implant allows the ETs to both monitor and control our brain waves. The device is far more effective than the unaided telepathy of my first encounter. Virtually every thought that can be intercepted, perceptions, and emotions can be monitored and influenced, and most significantly, human intelligence, or at least our awareness, can be markedly heightened at the ET's discretion. For some unknown reason, I was granted this enhanced awareness, which was facilitated by my own implant. Despite the horror and residual pain of having that thing shoved up my nose, the positive aspects were striking. I could effortlessly solve a Sudoku puzzle and knew that the potato salad in the store's deli had spoiled even before the associate had a chance to spoon it out. The effect also failed embarrassingly on a few occasions. In one troubling episode, I was sure the aliens would be helpful in guiding me in making profitable investments in the stock market. They weren't, and I didn't. The most significant effect in play at first was the startling intuition I had into things of which I should have had no knowledge. I found that I had remarkable insight into the aliens' physical makeup and details of their spaceship's propulsion, navigation, and life support systems. Getting back to the relatively elemental communication of the first encounter, it was pretty much limited to relieving my anxiety and conveying the notion that the ETs were screening me for some enterprise that was very important to them. I was also given the strong impression that I needed to be in my truck when the saucer took off.
Why do you think they wanted you to be in your truck?
They must have known that the spacecraft produced radiation or some other product that could be harmful. I was glad I took their advice. I discovered when I got home the truck's hood and the top of the cab were discolored.
Your second encounter occurred 1 year after the first, when you took an unexpected weekend off from work for a brief de-stressing getaway. In retrospect, do you think that taking that weekend was not entirely your own idea?
That's a very good question that I hadn't considered until now. We'd taken on a development contract at work that was beyond our area of expertise, and the project was in trouble. The engineering staff had devoted a lot of overtime and both weekend days for over a month attempting to get the problems worked out. A critical milestone was looming. I was pretty much burned out and I certainly needed some time off, but it was very unlike me to put my own comfort ahead of my work. I'm not sure how much influence the aliens had over me then, in that I didn't have the implant at that time. Perhaps they were involved, but then again they may have just waited for an opportunity to present itself.
What happened that weekend?
I recalled that a friend had offered our family the use of his camp located in a remote area just outside of the Adirondack Park, and I decided to take him up on it for the weekend. My family elected to stay home, so I was on my own. I arrived by late afternoon and had settled in to read a book that I'd brought along, doing more napping than reading. Around dusk, I awoke to a disturbance outside and soon realized that I was probably about to participate in another alien encounter. Powerless to do otherwise, I was escorted aboard the spacecraft by 2 Greys, and there we were met by a 3rd crew member. Although initially shaken by the second encounter with the Greys, I had calmed down and, bowing to my engineer's curiosity, was excited to observe the many fascinating structures and equipment inside the saucer. The thrill turned to stark fear when I discovered what surely had to be the infamous operating table reported by other abductees. I could envision all manner of slicing and dicing. I had good cause for concern. Virtually incapacitated by what I presume was a telepathic command, I was unable to offer any resistance while being escorted to the table, being strapped down, and getting poked with an instrument that caused me to pass out. I eventually awoke, still strapped to the table with bloodstains on my shirt and a sharp pain below my right eye. The Greys had all disappeared. Soon, nearly fully conscious, I became aware of a low-frequency vibration and the mild sensation of being pushed into the table. We were obviously going somewhere.
What did it feel like when their craft lifted off?
The sensation of acceleration at first alarmed me. Where were we going and why? I'd had more than enough of the aliens by that time. My eye hurt and I was anxious to put this experience behind me. Strapped as I was to the table, there was nothing I could do about the situation anyway. I closed my eyes and was immediately aware of a clear, dreamlike image of a building by a lake. The scene was dynamic. The building and the lake was quickly receding in size as if speeding away from it. I was seeing my friend's camp with my truck parked nearby, and we were speeding away from it. Soon the camp became a dot and disappeared. Eventually, as I watched awestruck, the curvature of the earth became apparent. At that point, the low rumble and the sensation of being pushed into the table ceased. I was startled to see that the grays who had been out of sight were now moving around, or more accurately, floating around as if they were weightless. Two of them approached the table and released the straps tying me down. I floated off the table and was totally stunned and enthralled by the feeling. I was allowed time to acclimate myself to being weightless while floating around inspecting the machinery and equipment that filled the interior of the saucer. Although I was too large to fit into the cockpit area atop the craft, I jammed my torso inside sufficiently to observe the control panels and the scene visible in the observation ports. We were obviously not on planet Earth. The pitch-black vista in the viewports was dotted by thousands of spectacularly clear and bright stars. The remarkable tour ended with me strapped to the table again as we returned to my friend's camp. I had obviously been treated to this extraordinary experience as a reward or compensation for some reason unknown to me at the time. As events unfolded, it was a small payment for the ordeal I was destined to undergo.
Stewart, reflecting upon this experience, why do you think they wanted another visit with you?
That's another very good question for which I don't have a definitive answer. During the first encounter, the Greys took a tissue sample and a lock of my hair. They obviously were searching for a genetic marker of some sort. Whatever it was, I must have met the requirement. Although it took a while for me to come to the realization, the second abduction was primarily to install the implanted monitoring device. It marked the beginning of a tumultuous period in my life.
Stewart, how did this encounter affect you both emotionally and physically?
This encounter had a profound effect, at first very rewarding, that I attribute to alien intervention through the implant. Upon my return to work, I almost immediately visualized a solution to the problem that had been vexing the engineering staff. My idea that probably benefited from ET involvement ultimately saved the program. I was a local hero for a few days. I discovered that some everyday tasks like balancing the checkbook became easier. I also was occasionally warned of potential hazards like that potato salad incident. The most significant effect, as I mentioned earlier, was the insight that I was granted into details of alien physiology and the technical aspects of their spaceship. I found that as I pondered a question regarding a particular subject, a precise, detailed answer usually materialized instantly.
Fascinating. My guest, Stewart W. Bench, his book, A Cosmic Encounter, A True Story of an Alien Abduction. Stewart, please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Thank you, Victor. My book is available on all the online sites such as Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can also get it at your local bookstore, and I encourage patronizing your local bookstore. My website is stewartwbench.com. That's STEWARTWBENCH.com, and they can find out more about me there.
And we'll be back with more of Stewart and A Cosmic Encounter, a true story of alien abduction, after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from New Thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute?
When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can, making sure they're safe and comfortable. But it's just as important that you take some time for yourself. At AARP, we can help with information and useful tips on how you can maintain a healthy life balance, care for your own physical and mental well-being, and manage the challenges of caring for a loved one. Because the better care you take of yourself, the better care you can provide for your loved one.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Stewart W. Bench, his book, A Cosmic Encounter, a true story of an alien abduction. And for those who may have joined us late, Stewart's voice is being masked to keep his identity private at his request. Stewart, with your engineering background, you give detailed descriptions in A Cosmic Encounter of the structure and operation of their craft. Did you ever consider that this may have been another reason you were selected by them?
I was pleased to be able to share this information with the public. My situation was unique in a number of ways that seemed to point to the Greys wanting me to publicize what I learned. First, many abductees have little knowledge of what transpired during their encounter. Consensus is that ETs purposely block the memory. Often, the details only emerge with probing by a hypnotist. Also, it was obvious to me that the information I had access to could be controlled and limited by the aliens. As I indicated, there were incidents such as attempts to show off my mastery of Sudoku and my stock market fiasco that failed embarrassingly. And there's no doubt that the ETs could have prevented publication of the book. So, what was their intent and why me? I have no idea.
Perhaps as time goes on, you'll have a greater understanding as to why they chose you and the higher purpose therein. Please share some of the information you gleaned with our listeners. You say that in the center of the craft you saw a heavily shielded nuclear reactor. What did you eventually learn about how their vehicles function?
The spacecraft I visited on my second encounter may represent an earlier design, in that it used an antimatter drive system instead of the anti-gravity propulsion system purportedly discovered in a crashed saucer. The antimatter propulsion system produces incredible amounts of thrust by the powerful annihilation of matter external to the ship by contact with antimatter expelled from the spacecraft. Even in the so-called vacuum of space, there is sufficient matter encountered to produce substantial thrust. Antimatter is produced by the head-on collision of two highly accelerated and energetic streams of protons stripped from hydrogen. A critical requirement of the equipment that produces and conducts the antimatter within the saucer is to prevent the catastrophic contact between antimatter and the ship's structure. The antimatter output from the accelerator is split into two streams that are routed to two special nozzles on the ship's hull. These are controlled by the navigation system to direct the angle of the exiting antimatter to propel the ship in the programmed direction of travel. The propulsion system demands immense levels of electrical power. The very powerful nuclear reactor you mentioned provides the majority of the power needed. The remainder comes from thermocouples on the hull and a very sophisticated alien version of a flywheel and electrical generator. The propulsion, navigation, and life support systems and much, much more are covered in detail in the book.
And if you'll allow me a little pun, matter and antimatter will be a matter of discussion for another time. How did this experience impact your life, including relationships with your family, friends, and work associates?
We talked earlier about the relatively good impact the experience had on my lifestyle. Unfortunately, there was also a truly devastating and life-threatening component that developed over time. About 6 months after the second encounter, things began to take a turn. It started with a slight loss of my mental acuity and progressed into episodes of vertigo while driving that resulted in a minor traffic accident. About a month after the accident, I began to experience extremely troubling dreams. I became irritable and unpleasant at home and at work. I lost my appetite and began to lose weight. I often arrived late at work if I arrived at all and was obviously ignoring personal hygiene. Relationships at home deteriorated to the point that my wife insisted that I consult a psychiatrist. I stubbornly and vociferously refused. Fearing the negative impact I was having on the kids, my family and our pets moved out to a nearby apartment. Bev picked up the mail, paid the bills, and arranged for food items to be delivered to me. Most of the food ended up in the trash. As out of it as I was, I knew that my situation was heading in a dire direction. With little prior religious conviction, I began to earnestly pray for this to end, and slowly I did begin to recover. I was convinced that the implant was responsible for my decline, and whether my recovery was due to prayer or the implant losing potency, I was determined to make a doctor's appointment to have it removed. That decision prompted a third, very unpleasant, and final visit by the Greys, during which they removed the implant themselves.
Wow. Did this episode have a happy ending?
Thankfully, yes. I eventually recovered, Bev and the kids returned, and I was able to convince my boss that I was sane enough to be rehired. Since that third encounter, I've had no further involvement with extraterrestrials.
Stewart, do you think the Greys actually meant you any harm?
No, probably not. But they certainly had to be aware of what was going on. Either they didn't care about the misery I was experiencing, or it was part of their plan. I believe they probably were testing me. I've always wondered just how far they were willing to let my decline progress. I truly believe that it could have become life-threatening. Anyway, when they interceded to remove the implant themselves, that ended our relationship.
They obviously wanted a long-term relationship with you. Why did they seek this, and were you given a choice in the matter?
Our relationship no doubt ended earlier than they had planned. Just what their motivation was has eluded me to this day, and I most certainly had no say in the matter.
How did this experience change you?
I've become much more sensitive to the fear and other emotion that abductees experience. I look for snippets of facts in the accounts that I read which reinforce the information I collected. I've also become a lot more skeptical about some of the claims made in books and the media. I can tell you that UFOs and aliens are forbidden topics for discussion around our home. I avoid any mention of my experience, even to close friends who are understandably curious about what I went through.
Please share with our listeners some technical details about your implant.
The implant is a tiny electronic device that, as we discussed earlier, enables the ETs to monitor and influence humans' brainwaves. It is addressed from a distance electromagnetically. To be effective, it has to be surgically inserted near the brain. A common location is the tissue below the eye, accessible through a person's nose. The skin of the implant thwarts the human body's tendency to reject a foreign object. It also prevents vascular and tissue growth that could tend to encapsulate the device. The device is designed to remain in place but can be removed without permanent damage to surrounding tissue. The implant has a limited lifetime and will eventually cease to function. Some abductees report having undergone removal and replacement of an expired device. The implant is powered by the reaction of body chemicals with dissimilar metals on the implant surface and by the energy received while it is being interrogated.
My personal experience has shown that contact experiences often occur in families and in family lineages. You made the startling discovery that you were not the first member of your family to have contact. How did you find out?
During my tour of the UFO's cockpit on my second encounter, I spotted a number of what appeared to be large, laminated star charts hanging on a hook on the side of the console. The charts looked vaguely familiar, but I didn't know why until one day, long afterward, it suddenly dawned on me. Grandpa's trunk. As a preteen kid on family visits to my grandparents' home in Maine, I'd spend hours perusing the many treasures in their attic. One of these was an old locked trunk that I was able to jimmy open. Among the books, letters, and photographs in that trunk was a bunch of charts very similar to the ones on the spaceship. Although the significance was lost on me at that time, the photos of the youthful guy in a military uniform surrounded by a pile of twisted metallic wreckage and those charts is convincing evidence that Grandpa had been present in some capacity at a crashed UFO site.
As I've shared here before, when I had my experiences as a kid growing up in the 1950s, reporting this to my mother and father resulted in being told I had an overactive imagination. My mother had been ill for many years before passing in January of 2020, and I used to visit her frequently and bring her her favorite lunch, and we'd sit and chat for hours. And on one of those occasions, she asked me, why did she have Parkinson's disease? She said there was no history of Parkinson's disease in our family. And I said, Mom, you never believed me when I told you what was happening when I was a kid. But frequently, families who have had contact experiences often manifest genetic changes. I pointed out specific genetic changes that my siblings and I share, nothing life-threatening but interesting. And I said, but you never believed me when I told you about my experiences when I was a kid. And then I asked the million-dollar question. You never had anything strange happen, did you? And she said no, except for the time, and the hair on the back of my neck started standing up, except for the time that you were about a year old, which would have been either January or February of 1954. She said she heard me crying around 3 o'clock in the morning, got up and went to the kitchen to prepare a bottle for me. A strange light came through the window, and that's the last thing she remembered until the following day. So I thanked her for confirming my experiences, and obviously you have gratitude in the connection that you made with your grandfather's belongings.
Yes, that confirmation was very important to me.
You also had a strange connection with someone who had a shared experience. This is very detailed in a cosmic encounter, but please briefly share this and what it was like.
You're no doubt referring to my meeting with Christina. I was in the habit of stopping by our local diner for a bagel and coffee Saturday mornings after retrieving the mail at the post office. On this occasion, as I sat there alone, I became aware of a vague image of the diner's interior from another perspective. Alarmingly, the image remained when I closed my eyes. In near panic, I was thinking that I was experiencing a stroke or some other medical emergency, and then a young lady approached my table, touched my shoulder, and asked if she could sit with me. I stammered an incoherent response as she sat down. I was flabbergasted when she suggested that she knew I had an alien implant. As it turned out, the lady named Christina was an abductee who also had an implant. She knew of mine because she also had perceived an image of the diner that was obviously from my perspective. She explained that she had learned the phenomena was called crosstalk and was common in abductees with implants when they're within about 25 feet of one another. I was relieved that I wasn't going crazy or about to pass on, and it was refreshing to be able to compare notes with another abductee.
Thank you for sharing that. I've been a member of various meetup groups and also MUFON, and it's always wonderful to connect to other people who have had similar experiences, be they abduction or non-abduction, as many of us think our experiences have been, and be able to share notes and talk about the commonality of the experience, the things that we learned from the experience, and how it changed our lives. So thank you for sharing that. And listeners, if you're interested in any of that, I suggest you go to MUFON.com or find a local meetup group in your area that shares these stories and experiences. My guest is Stewart W. Bench. His book, A Cosmic Encounter, A True Story of an Alien Abduction. We'll be back with more of Stewart after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Stewart W. Bench. His book is called A Cosmic Encounter, A True Story of an Alien Abduction. And as we've mentioned before, Stewart's voice is being masked at his request to protect his privacy. Stewart, in our last segment, you had mentioned the grays coming back and removing your implant. You said this was your third and final contact. Are you certain of that?
I'm tempted to say that I'm certain that I had no further contact. My experiences weren't buried in my subconscious, as is often the case reported by many abductees. These folks might never have known of their abduction without undergoing hypnotic intervention. I have total recall of the events, which in the scheme of things appears to be pretty extraordinary. Of course, because I've never undergone hypnotic regression, I suppose that in theory it is conceivable that I could have had contact that I'm not aware of, which was masked by the aliens. Gee, Victor, thanks a lot. Now you've got me wondering.
My apologies, Stewart, but I'm certain that if you did, you would have remembered them, so I don't think you have to wonder at all. Stewart, have you had any lingering ill effects from your abductions?
If I was a cat, the entire episode would have used up 8 of my 9 lives. Seriously, I don't believe a person could go through the trauma I went through without being changed. I still have troubling memories on occasion, which I'm able to suppress for the most part. But rather than dwell on the admittedly awful effects I endured, I concentrate on the positive aspects, the really neat things that I learned, my heightened appreciation of good health, the love of my family, and also my newfound respect for the power of prayer.
Any post-traumatic stress disorder?
I don't believe so. I was dealing with what I'm sure would be diagnosed as a deep, dark depression. My full recovery took a few months, but thankfully, except for those memories that sometimes surface, I have no seriously troubling after effects. And not all of those memories are unpleasant. I was afforded a very unusual opportunity. In retrospect, though, if given the choice, I'd gladly pass on the alien experience. But then, I'd never have written a book or appeared on Destination Unlimited.
And of course, we are grateful that you are well, grateful that you wrote your book, and grateful that you joined me on Destination Unlimited. Stewart, your story includes a close encounter of the government kind with a man in black. What was his admonition to you?
There was another strange occurrence. I'd been extremely careful to not mention my abduction to friends and coworkers, yet a government rep somehow found out about it. The only person I had confided in was the lady at the diner. In any event, the dark-suit-attired individual sternly admonished me to, quote, keep your mouth shut. Why he thought I'd be a risk is baffling, in that I had no intention of jeopardizing my wife's job or mine and losing our friends by doing anything other than keeping my mouth shut.
The man's admonition apparently wasn't stern enough. You wrote the book anyway.
Point well taken. Anyway, Bev and I are retired now, and the kids are long out of the nest. There isn't much they can do to me now. Besides, if they read the book, they might actually learn something.
Now that's funny. Thank you for sharing that. Stewart, we have many listeners who have had contact experiences, some of the third kind and some of the worst kind. What advice would you offer them?
I'd recommend that they try to suppress negative recollections and ferret out and dwell on only the positive aspects of their encounter. After all, experiencers and abductees are very special people. Of the billions of people on the planet, they possessed some attribute that singled them out for their truly unique destiny. Their lives have been touched by entities whose technology totally baffles our scientists and who probably came from a place in the cosmos that we humans may never be able to visit. Wear the badge proudly, knowing that you stand out among your peers.
That is wonderful advice, and thank you for sharing that. Aside from your meeting with Christina, have you met other experiencers or abductees?
I must have been in the company of other experiencers and abductees at the few UFO conferences I attended, although I never was aware of a fellow abductee's presence by way of the crosstalk phenomenon. I purposely avoided the temptation to engage anyone in conversation out of concern for their true motives for being there. I was still working at the time, and the government guy's edict to keep my mouth shut still reverberated in my consciousness. I had no doubt that government representatives attired in jeans and in UFO-themed T-shirts were in attendance. The opportunity to compare notes with Christina was very rewarding, and I would have loved to do so with another experiencer. I just didn't dare. The accounts of abduction I was reading had to suffice for flesh and blood contact.
I've been attending UFO conferences and experiencer meetup groups for 25 years. I find them to be fascinating, informative, and also corroborative of my experiences. There was a gathering in New Jersey about 15 years ago, and after the main conference, a private circle was arranged for experiencers and abductees. We went around the circle, sharing our experiences, good and bad, and supported one another through the exchange. One man shared his experience of driving down a road in New Jersey and noticing an unusual light in the woods adjacent to the road that seemed to be keeping pace with him. He was curious and pulled over, and then had 30 minutes of lost time. He composed himself and drove home. While getting ready for bed, he sensed a slight burning sensation in his right calf. He looked at his leg, and there was a triangular scar that he had no explanation for. As he shared this tale, I chuckled a little. He looked at me with a "why are you laughing" expression on his face. I pulled up my right pants leg and showed him a virtually identical scar on my right calf. We shook hands and acknowledged our common experience.
That's very interesting. The only physical reminders I had of my first visit was a temporary sunburn-like irritation on my face, a few missing strands of hair, and the hole they poked in my finger taking a tissue sample. I've got a question for you. Any idea what might have happened during your encounter that left that mark on your leg?
It happened when I was very young, and I do not remember the actual marking. My sense is that this may have been some kind of tissue sampling or identification mark. Stewart, there is so much more in a cosmic encounter that readers will find fascinating and fellow experiencers will resonate with. What message would you like readers to take away from your experiences and your book?
There's so much that we've yet to learn about our cosmic visitors, and so much we'll probably never know. The few tidbits of information we've accumulated comes from accounts of observers, experiencers, and authors like myself. What we perceive of these beings, their technology, and their mission is corrupted by our biases and our limited human intellect. So the picture that emerges is vapor-thin and full of holes and is twisted and distorted. In time, some of the holes will get filled in, our mistakes will be corrected, and a better picture will emerge. In the meantime, we present what we think we know in the hope that it advances our understanding of this enigma, which we'll never fully understand. So, while acknowledging the shortcomings, I'd still like to think that this book moves us an inch or so along the path of discovery.
Stewart, I share that hope with you, and I know that readers will find a lot of valuable information in a cosmic encounter.
Again, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to you, Victor, for the opportunity to appear on Destination Unlimited. Oh, by the way, there's a sequel in the works. Maybe we'll be doing this again sometime.
Whoa, wait a minute. That's news. Tell me about the sequel.
Sorry, I can't do that, but there's a hint at the very end of the book. I can assure you that you'll be one of the first to know when the sequel is about to be released.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for teasing us, and I'm sure there's going to be something very exciting in the sequel. My guest, Stewart W. Bench, his book, A Cosmic Encounter, a true story of an alien abduction. Stewart, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Thank you, Victor. My website is stewartwbench.com. That's STEWARTWBENCH.com. My book is available through Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and I support local independent bookstores. Please visit your local independent bookstore and ask them for A Cosmic Encounter.
And if your independent bookstore is owned by aliens and ETs, perhaps they'll give you A Cosmic Encounter. Stewart, once again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your amazing story.
My pleasure, Victor, and I am grateful to you.
And we are grateful to you for joining us this week on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.